It was supposed to be a quiet project, just me, a few piles of lumber, and the start of a little lakeside cabin I'd dreamed about for years. But the moment the first post went up, here came Karen, marching down from the HOA with a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other. "You can't build that here. This lake is protected HOA space." Before I could even finish explaining, she called 911, claiming I was illegally constructing on community-controlled shoreline. The cops showed up fast, but when they pulled the property records, everything changed. Because that community lake Karen was screaming about, it wasn't HOA land at all. It was mine. Every ripple, every bank, every inch. The day they tried to stop my cabin build was the day they learned I didn't just own the land beside the lake. I own the whole waterway. There's a kind of peace you can't fake, the kind that only comes with water. The ranch had been in my family for generations, but the lake, that was always the crown jewel. A mirror-flat body of water tucked behind a tree line, untouched by speedboats or summer tourists. It didn't matter how busy life got. Whenever I came out here, everything slowed down. After inheriting the ranch from my father, I made myself one quiet promise. Build something simple, by the lake, just for me. Not a mansion, not a lodge, just a one-room cabin, cedar siding, screen porch, and a wood stove. Somewhere to rest, to fish, to remember what matters. And so, that's what I started doing. The cabin build began like most things do out here, slow, steady, and by hand. I didn't bring in contractors. No noisy crews or trucks. Just me, my tool belt, and some help from my cousin on weekends. We cleared a patch near the shore, just back far enough to stay off the wetland edge, and started framing out the foundation. The posts were set, the beams leveled, and a floor deck was finally in place. I was hauling in a bundle of 2X, 6S when I saw the SUV. White, shiny, parked on the old gravel loop that technically connected to the HOA development next door. And, standing next to it, Karen. I didn't know her name yet, but everything about her posture told me she was there to inspect, not to ask. Arms crossed, sunglasses reflecting the lake, a clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. She marched up the hill like she owned it. "Excuse me, are you the one building this?" I set down the lumber and wiped my hands. "Sure am," I said calmly. "It's going to be a little cabin, just a quiet place by the water. You can't build that here. This entire lake is under Ridge Lake HOA guidelines. Lakeside construction has to be approved by the board." I raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am," I said, "this land and this lake is part of my family's ranch. It's not in your HOA. You can see the fence line back there. Your boundary ends 200 feet uphill." "No, it doesn't," she snapped. "We have jurisdiction over all lakefront property. Section 6 of the Community Handbook says no additional structures are allowed without HOA oversight." Now, I've had plenty of odd conversations in my time, but it's not every day someone tells you that your own shoreline isn't yours. I kept my voice steady. "Well, you might want to check your map again. I've got the deed that says otherwise." She scowled and looked at the lake like it had personally betrayed her. Then, without warning, she pulled out her phone. Karen dialed 911. Right there, on my land, in front of my lumber stack and half-frame deck, she told the dispatcher that someone was erecting an illegal structure on protected community property. I could hear her voice rise as she added, "He's refusing to stop construction and is being combative." I hadn't moved, hadn't raised my voice, hadn't even taken a step toward her. I just stood there, hands on my hips, stunned that someone could be so confidently wrong, and so loudly wrong. She hung up and said, "The sheriff's department is on the way. I suggest you stop hammering unless you want to be cited." The patrol car showed up 20 minutes later. 2 deputies stepped out, one older, clearly experienced, and the other looking like he was fresh from the academy. They walked up slowly, eyes scanning the site. Karen rushed over, waving her clipboard. "Officers, thank God. He's been building a structure right on the lake without HOA clearance. This whole lake is protected under Ridge Lake's bylaws." The older deputy turned to me. "You the owner here?" "Yes, sir." "Full name?" "I inherited this land last year. Been part of my family for over 60 years." "You got proof of ownership?" I nodded and pulled out a copy of the deed I kept in my truck, just in case something like this ever happened. He looked it over carefully. Karen leaned in, tried to read it over his shoulder. That can't be right. We maintain this whole lake. We have policies. The deputy raised a hand to quiet her. Ma'am, this document shows clear ownership of the lake and surrounding land under his name. Your HOA boundaries don't extend past the fence line up the hill. But unless you can produce a survey or legal document proving otherwise, there's no violation here. Karen looked like someone had slapped her. She opened her mouth, then shut it. The younger deputy turned to me and asked, "Mind if we walk the perimeter? Just to confirm no encroachment." "Go right ahead," I said. I flagged everything last week. Corners are marked in orange paint. While they checked the boundaries, Karen stood like a statue, fists clenched. The older deputy returned a few minutes later. "Everything checks out. You're well within your rights, sir." Then he turned to Karen and added, without ceremony, "Calling 911 to report legal construction on private property isn't just a waste of resources. It's close to filing a false report. We won't press it this time, but don't let it happen again." Karen looked like she was going to argue. Instead, she spun on her heel, stomped back to her SUV, and peeled out like a teenager denied prom. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The deputies nodded, thanked me for cooperating, and left. I stood there, in the middle of my half-built cabin, surrounded by tools and timber, wondering how something so peaceful could become so ridiculous. But deep down, I wasn't mad. I was curious, because if Karen really believed the HOA owned or controlled the lake, then where did that idea come from? That's when I decided to dig deeper. Because I wasn't just building a cabin anymore. I was about to uncover who really owned the water, and who'd been pretending they did. Karen's meltdown didn't scare me. It interested me, because someone doesn't call 911 with that much conviction unless they believe they're right, or they're used to getting away with pretending they are. Either way, it raised a question I couldn't shake. What made her so sure the HOA controlled the lake? That question sent me on a mission I didn't realize would unravel a lie bigger than a 911 call. The next day, I cleared my schedule, grabbed a binder full of old paperwork from my dad's office, and headed into town. First stop, the county recorder's office. It wasn't my first time there. I'd pulled the ranch deed last year during probate. But this time, I wasn't just checking boundaries. I wanted the water rights, the history, the overlooked footnotes buried beneath decades of assumptions. A friendly clerk named Marta led me to the back counter. "Looking for anything specific?" "Yeah," I said. "Water access records tied to parcel 17F through 17H. Anything from the 1950s forward." She raised an eyebrow. "Going fishing?" I smiled. "Something like that." Within the hour, I had a stack of documents 3 inches thick and more answers than I bargained for. Here's what I found. The original ranch deed, recorded in 1958, included not just the land surrounding the lake, but the entire lake bed itself, listed under natural water retention and use zone. A 1972 filing by my grandfather applied for private non-navigable water rights through the State Water Board, and it was granted. That meant exclusive legal control over the water, shoreline, and any inlets or outlets not connected to public waterways. No recorded transfers. No easements. No mention of the HOA, ever. The HOA's boundary, established by a developer in the early 2000s, stopped a full 200 feet from the waterline. They never owned the lake. Not the edge of it. Not a dock. Nothing. I sat there, flipping through the last of the filings, heart pounding like I'd found a secret treasure chest. Because this wasn't just about proving Karen wrong. It was about finally confirming what my father had always said in passing, that the lake wasn't shared or community managed or even regulated. It was ours, and now I had every page of proof to back that up. Still, I wanted it airtight. So I called my attorney, Clay, a sharp, no BS land lawyer who helped me during probate. I gave him the rundown, sent him scanned copies of the documents, and asked what the next move should be. He got back to me that night. "This is clean. No question about it. You have full ownership of the lake and riparian control. If they're acting like they own it, they're in violation. We file a declaration of private waterway ownership with the county. Then we send a cease and desist to the HOA. If they keep pushing, we press for trespass and civil overreach. I told them to proceed. By Monday, the documents were filed. By Wednesday, the cease and desist letters were in the mail. Each letter, signed, sealed, and delivered to every board member of the Ridge Lake HOA, stated in plain English. The property known as Mirror Point Lake, including all contiguous shoreline and submerged terrain, is wholly owned by protagonist's full name, as per county record hashtag 7129RL 1958. The Ridge Lake HOA has no legal authority to regulate, restrict, or enforce any action upon said lake. Any further attempt to harass, cite, or block construction efforts on this property will be considered criminal trespass and civil harassment, and will be pursued accordingly. There was no ambiguity. The lake wasn't shared. It wasn't common space. It was mine, and now they had it in writing, backed by county records and water board filings. The response? Predictably loud and completely ineffective. Karen posted a furious message on the HOA's community bulletin board calling me a threat to neighborhood unity and accusing me of privatizing a sacred community resource. She urged neighbors to stand together against illegal land grabs. But her words had lost weight because residents had seen the county's online map update. They'd received the letter. They'd spoken to neighbors. And most importantly, they'd started asking questions. One neighbor, a soft-spoken dad named Marcus, showed up at my gate the next weekend. "Hey," he said, awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. "Just wanted to apologize. I didn't know Karen called the cops on you. I thought the lake was, part of the HOA." I nodded. Most people did. He paused. "So it's really private?" I handed him a laminated copy of the original survey map. He stared at it for a long time. "Well, damn," he said. "Guess that explains why my boat keeps getting warnings for docking too close." We both laughed. Over the next week, things got quiet. Karen didn't return to the lake. No more drive-bys. No more emails. Just silence. But the HOA board? They weren't done yet. I received one final letter, this time from a real estate attorney they'd hired, demanding I cease all construction activities until jurisdiction can be clarified. Clay responded with a single-page reply. "Jurisdiction is already clarified. Your client is advised to stop interfering with private land development or face legal consequences. You have no standing." That was the last we ever heard from their attorney. With the noise fading and the lawn now behind me, I got back to work. The cabin framing went up fast. The porch beams were set by midweek, and the roof lines started taking shape. And every nail I drove into those timbers, it felt like more than just construction. It felt like a victory, not over a person, but over the assumption that just because someone speaks loudly, they must be right. Karen had stood on my shoreline and called it hers. And now, the only thing left echoing across that lake was the sound of my hammer and the quiet lapping of water I owned. Every drop of it. The lake had gone quiet, not the water itself, but the people who once treated it like their personal playground. After the cease and desist notices went out, the HOA and its self-declared queen bee, Karen, went radio silent for about a week. No more emails. No angry SUV idling at the end of my drive. Just me, building the cabin, hammer echoing off the still water. But I knew better. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It means someone's plotting their next move. That move came in the form of a bright orange envelope left on my gatepost. Inside, a letter from the HOA board claiming I had violated visual harmony standards and shoreline aesthetics policy, with an attached fine of $2,500. No joke. They were fining me for the appearance of a cabin I was building on my own land, beside a lake I owned. There were bullet points about unapproved construction, inappropriate wood tone, and my favorite, non-conforming window placement. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the letter in the lake. They weren't just overreaching. They were scrambling. So I responded the only way they'd understand, with paperwork. I had my attorney, Clay, draft an official cease and desist addressed, not just to the HOA, but to Karen personally, since she had been the one to initiate the false 911 call and continue the campaign of interference. This time we served it certified. No more informal warnings. No more letting things slide. The letter spelled it out in clean legal language. You are hereby notified that all activities undertaken by the Ridge Lake HOA and its representatives related to the regulation, enforcement, or attempted governance of Mirror Point Lake or its shore are unlawful and unsupported by deed, statute, or recorded agreement. You are further instructed to cease all threats, fines, communications, or citations directed toward protagonist name, or legal action will be initiated. That's when things escalated. The very next day, I got a knock on my cabin's frame from a man wearing a reflective vest and holding a clipboard. Code enforcement, he announced. We received a complaint about unpermitted construction. I stepped down off the deck and looked him in the eye. Permits filed. You're welcome to see it. He blinked. Wait, you have one. I pulled the printed copy from a folder under my tool shed table. He reviewed it, nodded, and said, Okay, then you're fine. Just needed to verify. Then, almost sheepishly, he added, This came from the HOA? Karen, specifically. Of course it did. I handed him one more document, my certified land deed and the county's map overlay, showing my parcel, the lake, and the exclusion zone for the HOA. He read it, let out a low whistle, and said, Well, looks like they've been barking up the wrong shoreline. He thanked me, tucked the documents under his arm, and left. Later that week, the county sent a warning letter to the HOA. You are not permitted to file code complaints on land outside your legal governance boundaries. Continued misuse of public resources may result in fines or audit. Boom. Kara didn't take it well. She went online, using the neighborhood message board, and posted a scathing rant accusing me of weaponizing legal technicalities to steal the lake from the community. Her post claimed I was building a luxury getaway to block lake access for the average family, and that generational land monopolies were the problem with America. It was long, dramatic, and filled with exactly 0 factual citations. But this time, her neighbors didn't cheer her on. They asked questions. A lot of them. One user replied, If he owns it, isn't it his right to build? Another, Karen, didn't you say the HOA had lake rights? But we just got a letter saying we never did. And a third, You told me my kids couldn't fish here last summer. Did you lie? Within 24 hours, Karen locked the post and disabled comments. By then, though, the damage was done. Clay and I took a step further. We filed a notice of private waterway status with the county. That meant the lake would now appear on all public maps, filings, and recreational listings as privately owned, with clearly recorded access rights. Or, more accurately, the lack thereof. To seal it in stone, we ordered custom signage. Private property, Mirror Point Lake. Access by deeded ownership only. I installed one at the main footpath and another at the inlet where the HOA kids used to launch their paddleboards. Karen saw it the next morning and lost it. She stormed down, phone in hand, again trying to film some kind of confrontation. I didn't take the bait, just pointed to the sign and said, Talk to my lawyer. Then I went back to nailing in the eaves of my porch. Days later, it became official. The HOA board posted a message, this one from the newly elected vice president, not Karen. After a thorough review of property lines and deeded boundaries, we acknowledge that Mirror Point Lake is private land and not under HOA oversight. All HOA enforcement attempts have ceased, and we apologize for previous confusion. That message? It was a white flag. Karen never posted again. Within a week, she was off the board entirely. Not officially removed, she resigned due to stress. But the writing was on the wall, or more accurately, on the lake. Her power evaporated the moment the community realized she'd been bluffing all along. What followed was quiet, calm, and for the first time in a long time, peaceful. Karen didn't go quietly. Even after the cease and desists, the legal warnings, the signs, and the public acknowledgement from her own HOA board, she still couldn't accept what had happened. She wasn't just fighting the fact that she lost the lake. She was fighting the realization that she never owned it in the first place. And when someone builds their identity on power they don't have, they don't step down, they implode. It started with whispers, not from me. I was still building my cabin, hammer in hand, content to let the dust settle. But Karen? She kicked up more of it. She told anyone who would listen that I had bought off the county clerk, that I'd manipulated old documents, and even claimed I was related to one of the code officers who had taken my side. It was wild, desperate, and easily disproven. She circulated a flyer one weekend, a cheap black and white handout slipped under mailboxes and HOA doors. Lake theft exposed. It listed a timeline of events inaccurate, a summary of my illegal actions unfounded, and a call for neighbors to sign a petition demanding the HOA reassert its authority. She got 6 signatures, out of a neighborhood of nearly 100 homes. And 2 of those later called to apologize. One guy said, "She just wouldn't leave our doorstep. I signed to get her off my porch." The message was clear. She wasn't convincing anyone anymore. Then came the board audit, not by the county, not yet anyway, but by the community itself. A group of homeowners, angry over how their HOA dues had been spent, demanded to see the financials. After months of silence and deflection, a partial ledger was released. And guess what showed up? $1,200 for legal consultation related to the lake. $400 in community signage, all of which had been taken down after the lake ruling. And the kicker, $2,500 filed under emergency legal strategy, KH, personal. That last one, Karen's initials. She'd spent HOA funds, not just for the board's defense, but for her own. The backlash was swift. A vote was called. 2 board members resigned before it even happened. A third was removed. And Karen? She didn't wait around. She announced her resignation via an email titled, "Stepping Away for the Good of the Community," which somehow managed to blame me, the board, and a lack of civic unity all at once. No epalegi, no admission. Just a long-winded rant ending with, "This was never about power. It was about principles." Funny how people say that after the power's gone. Meanwhile, my cabin continued to take shape. Walls framed, roof shingled, porch railings installed, without interference, without inspectors, without Karen showing up with a clipboard and a police dispatcher on speed dial. And slowly, the neighbors started to shift. They didn't just accept what happened. They embraced it. One family brought by a pie and said, "We thought that lake was for us, but now we see it never was, and honestly, you were more patient than anyone else would have been." Another stopped me mid-build and offered to help with siding. A retired veteran came by and handed me an old fishing rod. "Place like this needs a rod like that," he said. "Built mine back in '73. But the most telling moment came one Saturday afternoon. The HOA hosted a community conversation meeting, not a formal vote, just a gathering to talk about the future of neighborhood governance. It was civil, respectful, and missing something huge. Karen, her name was only mentioned once. Not in anger, not in mockery, just a simple sentence. Let's never let that happen again. The lake, once filled with paddleboards and unauthorized docks, now stood still, natural, and private. The signs had done their job. The county had updated its registry. The maps had been corrected. And the people? They'd moved on. Karen's house went on the market 3 weeks later. The listing called it a peaceful lakeview property with community charm. I chuckled when I saw that, knowing that the view came with a firm, notarized reminder that it wasn't her lake to sell. And the charm? Well, that was finally returning. Because the real charm of a place like this doesn't come from fake power or shouted rules. It comes from knowing where the lines are and respecting them. There's nothing like the final nail in your own cabin. Not metaphorically, I mean the literal last nail in the final cedar plank on the front porch. You sink it, take a breath, and stand back. Not to admire what you've built for others, but to let it finally feel real for yourself. It had taken months. Laws, maps, signatures, silence, and way more drama than you'd ever expect for a lakeside retreat. But it was done. The cabin was complete, perched just above the waterline, shaded by the trees my grandfather planted, with a screen porch that overlooked the lake that now bore only one name on the deed. Mine. I added a final touch before winter, a polished aluminum sign, screwed into a pine post at the lake's main access trail. Private waterway, access by deed only. No trespassing. No community use. Enforced under County Registry hashtag 7129 RL 1958. It wasn't aggressive. It was just final. A general boundary backed by law. And this time, nobody challenged it. Neighbors came by in quiet waves. Some stopped at the gate. Others waved from the gravel path. And a few, the ones who had once been swept up in Karen's fake rules, even brought peace offerings. One woman left a note in my mailbox. "Thank you for protecting what's real. We didn't know, now we do." Another man brought his son and asked, sheepishly, if I'd ever consider letting them fish from the far end again, like they used to before Karen started making up rules. I smiled and said, "Let's talk next spring." Because the truth is, I didn't want to punish anyone. I just wanted the truth respected. The new HOA board quietly rewrote their charter a month later. One of the lines read, "No HOA authority shall be extended beyond legally deeded property lines. All community rules must reflect verified ownership boundaries, as recognized by the county." Simple, direct, and something that should have been there from the start. But now it was because of what happened. Because someone finally pushed back against a rule book built on fiction. The lake, it stayed still, unbothered, unclaimed, unquestioned. Not because it had changed, but because now everyone knew the truth. And that made all the difference. Where once it had been treated like shared scenery, now it was seen for what it always was, a legacy protected by facts, not volume. A few people even started calling it the Quiet Lake. I like that, because that's exactly what it became, a place where the noise stopped and the law stood unshaken. I still sit on that porch most evenings. Feet kicked up, coffee in hand, water calm and still as glass. And sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I can hear laughter from the homes above. Kids playing, dogs barking, doors closing at dinner. It's a peaceful sound, the kind of peace that only comes after the lines are drawn and the fight is done. Sometimes building a cabin is just about peace, a quiet place by the water, away from the noise, the chaos, the demands of the world. And sometimes, it's how you draw the final boundary line. Not with anger, not with a fight, but with facts. When someone tries to claim what isn't theirs, when they weaponize policy, shout rules from behind a badge that means nothing, or call 911 hoping fear will do what the law cannot. The best thing you can do isn't shout back. It's to stand firm, with paperwork, with history, with truth. Because the louder they get, the more it exposes what they lack. And when the dust settles, it won't be about who talked the most. It'll be about who brought the deed, the survey, and the law to the table. If someone's trying to fence you out of what you rightfully own, don't panic. Document everything. File it right. Protect what's yours. Because peace doesn't come from permission, it comes from proof. If they call 911 on your land, make sure the only lines they cross are legal ones, and the only water they touch is yours by deed.